This thing called the Billy Meier UFO case, we're looking at one of Meier's well over 1,200, primarily daytime, stunningly clear, still irreproducible UFO photos. But this presentation is going to be different than any presentation we've done so far. But while that image is on the screen, I suggest you look at it and see if, for instance, you've been involved with looking into other so-called UFO cases, etc. If you've ever seen one single piece of evidence as stunningly clear and produced prior to any digital technologies, Photoshop, home computers, etc., no digital cameras. This was Meier's photographic and film evidence was all presented, captured and presented using non-digital film, all film technology, okay? And that's important because if you're looking at this and if this is authentic, then you're looking at something that wasn't made on this earth, wasn't made by any of us in any country on earth, and it's here for a reason. While we are now awash in all the media, all the UFO groups and everything else, with reports of UFOs and claims of alien this and extraterrestrial that, the fact is, from a scientific point of view, the confirmed existence of extraterrestrial life would be the single greatest discovery, most important discovery in all of science and human history, exceeded only by confirmed contact between said extraterrestrials and the people on Earth, or a person on Earth in this case. So let it sink in for a moment that everything you've heard and will continue to hear in the media, online, etc., about aliens and UFOs and extraterrestrials is and still will be absent any conclusive, independently analyzed evidence. In other words, proof beyond a reasonable doubt that it is an evidence of actual extraterrestrial life and technologies. So we have to look at what the criteria is for determining the truth, which is the quantity and the quality of the evidence. In 1964, we have what's called the foundational evidence. This is a drawing, an illustration of a woman who goes by the name of Asket and is said to be, according to the information in this case, an extraterrestrial human being who was the second extraterrestrial mentor, teacher for Edward Albert Meier, now known as Billy Meier. And it is also said that while she tutored and mentored him on board her craft, and took him into different places and times, that also Meier was very busy, very active, traveling around on Earth, 42 different countries in fact, hitchhiking, going on boats, what have you, and always supporting himself as a young guy, starting, we're going to be dealing with 1964, he's 27 years of age. And he is at that point at the Ashoka Ashram in Marauli, India, where he is studying Buddhism. He was traveling around studying all of the major religions of the world and many other things in different cultures. This is a photograph, again, 1964 photograph, of Asket's craft hovering right around the Ashoka Ashram, as will be the next several photographs. Some are sepia tone like that, some are in pure black and white, but all of them showing a disc-shaped object hovering. Here's a kind of zoom in close-up. And then in this particular photograph, and you may be able to detect that there is, lower right-hand corner, there's a woman who's looking out at the sky. And she was working at the ashram at that time. These 8 lights in the sky, and it's very rare for you to see Billy Meier photographs that are anything but stunningly clear photographs of actual craft. This being an exception when Asket and her people showed up and Meier was there to take the photograph. and they appeared more like lights in the sky. For right now, we'll leave the reason for this photograph and move on to show you the kind of camera that he was traveling around with, which was a 1940s Kodak bellows type camera. Very primitive camera, film camera. My father had one. The thing rolls out, and if you're lucky, when you click and you take the film and to get developed, you're going to get photographs. So all of these preceding items here, they're connected to this article, which I know you can't read clearly from there. But this is an article in the Delhi Statesman, a prominent newspaper that still exists in India, and that at the time this article was written by a very reputable reporter as well. The newspaper had been in existence for well over 100 years. And in this article, the reporter is describing this young vagabond who has a photo album with 80 UFO photos in it, and he describes a number of them, including the cross in the sky. So we have not only these photos taken with that camera, but we have documentation from 1964 in a newspaper that this indeed was presented to this reporter at the time. This makes it the earliest available photographic evidence from the Meier case. But there's more evidence in the case, and Pobal Cheng, who was an eyewitness to the events in India in 1964 for some time, is now a retired diplomat to the UN from Cambodia as a grown woman. In this photograph, you can see her and her brother flanking their uncle, who was the head monk, grandfather rather, pardon me, the head monk at the ashram. All right, so she was there, the grandfather was there, and in this image, this is taken from a videotape that we have as well in one of our films. Pobal Cheng came forward in the 1990s because people had been contacting her. Once the Meier case was starting to gain some public recognition, people were writing to her saying, wait a minute, Ashoka Ashram, you were there, and what do you know about this? She had put this part of her life, this time in the ashram, kind of behind her. She grew up, she went through her education, and went to the UN. Well, she decided that she needed to come forward and give like a press conference, along with another woman who was also at the ashram at that time. Both of them spoke at this event. And you see Pobal at a lectern, and in the background, one of Meier's photographs, and she's describing where on the property this was taken. And she explained for quite some time all about the sightings that people had. There were well over 100 people at the ashram who, like her, saw the craft, saw Meier, saw Asket, often walking around with Meier on the grounds. And Asket would, she said, sometimes come into her room at night right before she was falling asleep and would sing to her or whatever. And in the morning, she said, I'd wake up and I felt like I knew a lot more than when I went and fell asleep at night.
So this ship would appear, usually would be around the same time as I have the visitation, or sometime this was taken by Billy Meier. I would see it once a week or sometime twice a week, ship over the Ashoka Ashram, but from an angle behind the Ashoka Ashram, there's a little hill, and we used to call it the Dog Hill. This was taken on May 24, 1964. This was taken just on the side towards the east of the ashram. Sometimes I would see more than two, there would be a whole bunch of them. Taken from monuments in that area. It's called the Qutub Minar. This is an old Indian historical monument. Very interesting and also important to me, a whole bunch of them. But this is one of my ayah washing my clothes, sitting on the veranda outside my room. When I had my experience, I have seen a lot of ships over the trees, near the well, on the doghouse. Sometimes it was very low. I could see a huge half of this room size of the ship. So when I had experiences with Asket, it was also not something very unusual or strange for me. It was almost a return to some familiar state. Sometimes there would be a few villagers walking around and they would look up and see this. In the ashram itself, sometimes our servant would come and say, I saw something very strange. Have you seen? I would say yes, and that was the end of it. This is right on top of the ashram in the evening. Sometimes there would be people looking up with me, looking up, and some of them would see the ship very clearly like myself, but some would look at us and said, I don't see it. This is one of the phenomena where hundreds of people saw this. Even was written in the Indian newspaper in the 60s. Actually, one reporter was dispatched from the newspaper, I think the New Statesman or something. He came, talked to the villagers, talked to people who work at our place, and even talked to Billy and was shown the photos.
Bobo Cheng, then, a few years after she gave that public presentation, was interviewed in New York City, and around that time she and her husband went to Switzerland to meet with Billy again. She had not seen him 36 years or whatever, all that time. And they spent days together going back over their memories and recalling the events that she was privy to. And she also went and visited India. She went to the ashram. There's a video online about that. So what we have in what I call the foundational evidence in this Billy Meier case, we have 80 original UFO photos that were seen by a reporter and described. About 11 of those originals still remain, including the one with the cross in the sky and lights and craft, and still living credible eyewitnesses. As a matter of fact, in our film, The Silent Revolution of Truth, we brought in a man who, for the US military, teaches reading of body language for people who are special forces or Army Rangers, what have you, because people who are in high stress, high-level military positions, combat positions, have to be able to, as best they can, assess when another human being is present that they're not expecting or they're encountered, how quickly they can assess whether that person's a threat or not. Now, that's not always 100%, but this man taught that. And so he came in and I wanted him to assess Billy Meier and Pobal Cheng. So I had him watch videos of both of them speaking with no sound. So he would not be commenting, knowing anything about what they were speaking about. He was unaware of who Billy Meier was anyhow. And the assessment, as we have it reported by him in our film, was both of these people appear to be credible. They are saying what they are believing to be true. There's no evidence of deception or lying.
She seems like her body language is congruent. So it's in other words, when she's speaking, her hands move with whatever is going on. She's saying, I remember this. Typically, if I was lying, I wouldn't throw something like that in because I'm trying to get through it as quick as possible. So she goes into little snippets of the story. I would say that the way she's presenting it, either she's rehearsed it really well or she's telling what she believes in.
Wohin geflogen, wo wir uns unterhalten konnten und wo ich lernen konnte.
Neurolinguistic programming. Neuro standing for how you take the world in through your five senses. Linguistic is how that is communicated internally to you. And then programming is how do we change those internal communications so that we can take the world in differently. NLP was started in 1975, basically modeling some therapists, and now today it's really used much more as far as in the business community. So the skills of neurolinguistic programming are pretty much pervasive in healthcare and education in a lot of different places. What I'm noticing here is that he is looking down to his right a lot. And when people look down to their right, very often they're accessing emotions. They're accessing aspects of what's going on from an emotional sense. He's also looking down a little bit to his left, which would be his analytical mind. So, but most of this is looking down to his emotional self. It looks like he's talking pretty slow. At a nice pace, so that would be congruent with him speaking from his heart. His eyes, however, are blinking quite a bit, and that could be an indication, as far from a body language point of view, that he's actually not being congruent, that there's some nervousness there. However, if he is intelligent, that also may account for that and counter it.
The tape is taken back to be analyzed by Bob Phelan, a former criminal investigator with the Sheriff's Department of Colorado and a specialist in lie detection.
It was also a yes answer. Number 3, do you live in Switzerland? Yes, he lives in Switzerland. There's enough stress here to indicate that probably isn't where he prefers to live, or he's lived someplace else. Question 4 was the first relevant question you asked him, is have you taken the photographs of spacecraft? His answer was yes. He's being extremely forceful, though not deceptive. And my opinion on that particular question is that he's being as truthful as possible. Number 7 was the second relevant question you asked him, and he answered right on top of the question. And the person asking the question had asked him to answer the question again, and then he asked the question again. The stress levels between the two diminished the second time that the question was asked, which is not indicative of deception, because stress builds in a deceptive pattern. It doesn't diminish. If it was a deceptive answer, the stress would then increase, not decrease. Now, something was extremely interesting to me was the 8th question you asked him on, do you drink coffee? And for some reason, he's more stressful on the statement about coffee than he is about the picture of the spacecraft.
Yeah, that makes sense, because about 3 days before we tested Meier, he promised his wife he'd stop drinking coffee, but we noticed he'd been sneaking a few occasionally.
Okay, that could probably be the account for it then.
Phelan reviews the tape several times. He could find no evidence of deception in the statements about Meier's experiences.
Now, about 16 months ago, I got a phone call on a Saturday morning. A kind of gruff-sounding guy said, I'm Joe. You Michael? I said, yeah. You willing to talk to me about this Billy Meier case? I said, yeah, I am, Joe. What do you do? I'm an investigator. Let's leave it at that for now. Okay. So Joe and I, for about 3 months, the phone would ring like clockwork, 8:30 Saturday morning, and I found out that that was a good time for Joe because he lives in the East. He lives in Asia. He does not live any longer in the U.S. And he said, look, you know, I think this could be a hoax, but I want to see what you can tell me, and I'm going to figure this out for myself. 3 months, we go back and forth, and at a certain point, Joe, I don't know, something ticks him off. And he says, I can't tell you now. Okay. 6 months almost later, 5.5, 6 months later, Saturday morning, 8:30, the phone rings, and it's Joe. And Joe tells me just a little bit about who he is. He tells me that he's the former top-level case supervisor for the United States Air Force OSI, Office of Special Investigation, which is a department tasked with protecting national security of the United States, among other things, and among other organizations that contribute to that. Between 67 and 71 or so, he supervised hundreds of investigations. That means of people who were aspiring to higher office, or to even higher office, who could end up with their fingers on the nuclear trigger, people who were in the military, who may be looking to be promoted further. They wanted to vet everybody very thoroughly, and they were also looking to detect moles and spies. And Joe, who told me he was an expert in all this, proved it to me by sending me photographic evidence of all of his recommendations and all the praise you could heap on anybody from the military, all the appropriate seals. So he was who he said he was. And he said to me that based on the 1964 evidence, some of which you've just seen, the Meier case, the Billy Meier case, is 100% authentic, ironclad. And on top of that, he said, I'll take on any skeptics that want to debate it. I said, well, that's an interesting thing to say, Joe. You determined this how? And he said, well, as I said, I looked at all that information from 1964, And here's the thing. You've got a credible reporter at a reputable newspaper, and he's seen an album with 80 UFO photographs taken in the middle of nowhere in India by essentially a vagabond with very primitive equipment. I want to know where he could have gotten those 80 UFO photos if he didn't take them himself. I don't want theories. I don't want people to tell me that he bought them from UFOs that are us on the street in India in 1960. Where did he get those photos? And you still have them? We can look at them. And then he said, I also looked into Pobal Cheng. I found documentation online. She indeed was a UN diplomat. Fine record. She's who she says she is. On top of that, he said, I looked further into the case, and there was a special effects director whose name was Wally Gentleman. Wally Gentleman was the special effects director for Stanley Kubrick's 2001, a film made before some of your time, and other people here may recall it. And Kubrick hired him because he was about the best in Hollywood at the time. That was a very groundbreaking movie for the time. And Wally Gentleman was shown one of Meier's films, the first film that Meier took in 1975. He was asked then, can you duplicate this film? Can you explain this film? And he said, I can duplicate that film. It'll take, let's say, well, altogether it would cost about $80,000. I need a crew of 15 people. We have to get cranes and make large, all this. He said, you're telling me this was shot by a one-armed guy with a film camera? He says, there's no hoax here. He says, everything is correct about it. The light, the movement, and all that. So unless this is some real genius at work that we don't know anything about, you're looking at something that's authentic. We would require tens of thousands of dollars back in 1980. Nowadays, yes, you can do this with CGI. I went to the Academy Award-winning special effects people from, what was the film? Oh yeah, Independence Day. Now you're talking about relatively state-of-the-art special effects, not relying on big models or anything outside. So these two guys, Mark and Engel, I think are their names, I said, okay, can you do this? Same thing, just like had been asked of all the gentlemen before. And they said, well, yeah, we could do it, but we'd have to use CG. You'd have to be hanging some huge thing on a crane and wires. Notice the distance between the tree, the craft, and the sky. This is a close-up where it's zoomed in. Watch the top of the tree. It moves under the backwash of the craft. Maybe we can look at that again from the beginning and see what we get. The ship actually hangs for about 3 seconds to the side at an angle before it starts moving. This is Meier's first film. It was a rainy, snowy day, he said. Weather conditions weren't good, and he was quite a distance away, so here we have it zoomed in. Recently, an independent investigation on this film was done by Ral Zahi. One of the interesting things that was found was that in one of the frames, the ship in one of the frames is in 2 places at the same time. MUFON, exopolitics, towards the Stars Academy. Anybody want to talk to us about the Billy Meier? The Pentagon, they spent $110 million. They couldn't find this. Isn't that funny? What are we talking about here? We're talking about photographs like this. And a series of photographs where the craft was kind of parked temporarily in one spot in front of a tree and then moved around the tree. Meier was closer and farther away at different times. You could see the reflection of the sky, of the tree, clouds, etc. Just go back over these photos. That's a stunning photograph. It's a real tree. We've actually, years ago, had forestry experts from OSU, Oregon State University, look at these photos, and we said, forget the shiny silver thing. What about the tree? Models, miniatures, or real? Oh no, those are full-size real trees. You've got that nesting going on at the top, and In some of the other photos, you can see there's pruning marks. Nobody makes, miniature trees like that. Those are real. And they had the species, Albes something or other. Okay, so you also have, this is a frame from one of Meier's films. 3 of the craft are in the sky. The 2 smaller ones are kind of bobbing around to the side, and then they disappear. And the film goes on, and the other one's staying in the center. And then, of course, we have the photos where Meier has photographed 2 of the craft from above Switzerland, from inside the craft. Another one from inside the craft. This is a rather famous photograph, among many, because when it was analyzed independently, again, people say, oh, it's got to be miniature trees. Well, the branches are in front of the object. So if that turns out to be a real tree, that means that object is about 23 feet in diameter. No strings. Now we'll see if we can get this to play for you. You're not going to hear the sound all that clearly, but I'll tell you what it is. You have people looking at those photographs I just showed you, the one, the sunlight shot with the tree. And they look across the field, and there is the tree in full bloom on the hillside. The man on the left is a director for Nippon TV. He's with Billy Meier on the right. And they're trudging their way up towards the tree. Now, just keep an eye on these guys as they retreat into the distance and then start to get a sense of scale of their size compared to the tree. They're not all the way there yet. And Meier in this, what you're not hearing is he's describing where he was, how the sun was, and all the rest of it. Now, as you can see, we go back to this, there it is. You can see, based on the size of these 2 guys, now, that tree is approximately 40 feet in height. They just keep on getting smaller, and there's the tree. And he talks about how much time he had to film it. Has Stephen Greer ever showed you this? No. Why? What about exopolitics? Or our friends at MUFON? Never showed you this? Chasing lights in the sky? Is that what we're supposed to do? I don't think so. Unfortunately, you can hear some of the dubbed-in music here that I don't know why they put it. But watch the upper right-hand side of the ship at the top of the... Watch, there's a light, and there's a light. Broad daylight. Meier has zoomed in on the craft. The light goes on again. And now the sounds that you probably will be able to hear are the sounds he recorded using an Iowa tape recorder. 4 different occasions he recorded the sounds with about 17 people present, including an undercover policeman. Here comes the ship again. Catch the lights. Broad daylight, 1976.
Billy, we're using this to measure distance. It's the latest in infrared measuring devices. Yes. It's actually a small computer. It's made by Wild Heerbrug here in Switzerland. And what we're trying to do here, Lee is up there with the reflector. Yep. And what this will do is send infrared light out and reflect out of that reflector back here. And this will rapidly tell us the distance and will also tell us how much higher or lower he is.
That's about where you're standing, right there.
That's right, please. Yes. Okay, we'll go to on systems. Yes, we've got 1,262 feet, 0.85.
The precise measurements and photos are fed into the computer. The edges of known objects, such as the trees and the hills, are translated into pixels. Since these measurements are known, the number of pixels in the edge of the unknown object, the craft, gives its distance. The beam ship is determined to be just where Meier said it was. Simple triangulation then gives its size, 7 meters, or about 21 feet in diameter.
Measuring the edges of things and comparing it to all the other edges in the pictures, Based on the relationship of those edges?
The width of the edges and the properties in the edges. So we're stretching the data in the edges so we can count how many pixels wide it is. And it's very interesting what happens when you stretch them out, because it becomes very clear. Pixels, these little squares, like building blocks, and pretty easy to count. So we have our range here is from 6 to 8. Now what this tells us in looking at all of the edges on the object is, first of all, that it's not a flat piece of plywood hung in the air, or it's not a paste-up that was done. It actually has shape to it. And in this case, a very wide range, which has to do with focus. Some of the object is more in focus than other parts of the object, which tells me right off at that point that we're dealing with something of size to it.
To test the possibility that the Meier photographs were made using small-scale models suspended by transparent monofilament, the investigators bring with them a detailed model of a beam ship they identify as Variation 2. While Welsh flies the model on a hilltop above the farmhouse, Meier and Stevens snap several rolls of film. The camera Meier is using is the same one with which he took all the other pictures. The results are impressive.
So when we look at models, there's a variety of things that are different than when we look at photographs of these objects. Load in some colors first. That object right there is solid. It's one solid color. There's very little contour in it compared to other objects that are in the photograph, like the trees and things that we have color mapped in the background to be high contrast colors. So we're going from the brown object to the horizon. It takes 2 pixels. I mean, you can count it with your finger. You don't even need a computer.
Why is that important? What does it mean?
There's no contour to the object. Remember when we looked at the other photographs that were taken by Meier, the width of the edges ranged from 4 to 9. Point of the story. This is a small model. It's easy to tell small models. We don't really have to test every picture anymore to see if it's a real picture or not. We can't find anything that tells us it's a hoax, so let's start looking for things that are interesting. We get some kind of an aura, whether it's infrared, thermal energy, as yet I don't know. Look at the color here. It seems to contour to the shape of the craft.
Have you seen this in a lot of the other photographs?
In the Meier case, I think that craft is putting out a force field. What we're seeing here is that the film grain holds up the way that it should. In the pixel distortion test, it appears to me and to the computer that this object was photographed in the same original piece of film at the same time that the background was photographed. In other words, no overlay. I would say these pictures are genuine.
The wedding cake UFO. Everybody said, oh, that's got to be a garbage can lid with Christmas tree balls on it. I see. We have a video, this is what we're not showing today, where Meier is about 600 feet away, and this is one of the zoomed in photos he took of it while the video pans in and out, back and forth. A closer look at it. Notice at the bottom, left-hand side of the tree, a pruning of a branch, kind of irregular branch. It's not a miniature. A couple more detailed photos of the craft in different locations. Well, by golly, it's set down in Billy's front yard. He was 15 feet away from it here. 15 feet away from it. The Pentagon couldn't find it. These are some of the details. There's a guy in England who made a model, it was a very good model, but couldn't duplicate all the details. But he tried. This is kind of interesting and famous as well, and I'll show you something you can compare here. I was pointing to the globes and the rim right above them around the craft. Now, notice that right above the rim begins that contoured part, that dome type of point. However, when we zoom in on the craft here at night, that part of the craft has expanded. There's now more space in there for whatever reason. But of course, the skeptic said, well, this is nothing but a golden model photographed against a black curtain. Despite all this lovely detail work, a lot of detail, but anyhow, we have this wonderful glowing gold UFO. When Raoul Zahi did an analysis of the wedding cake craft as well, he put one of these 35mm film photos that you can pluck right off of the internet into Photoshop. And he adjusted contrast up, I think, and brightness down, vice versa. And what he saw then was this, that this is a large object that is hovering over a gravel road. There's a white post marker there. It's like they have in Switzerland. They're about a meter high, these markers on the road, and the grassy hillside. Just from dropping that black and white photo into Photoshop, suddenly the whole argument about a gold model against a black curtain goes away. A fellow in Hong Kong did the same thing, just adjusted differently. And he got it to look like this. Both of the photos show a kind of energy field. Different colors from the top up there, you can see it. I even had it displayed in Times Square, about 15 seconds worth or so, with a press release that I put out. And Raoul Zahi also wrote this wonderful book, this analysis of the wedding cake UFO, where they deal with the reflections in the globes and everything, and they use Google Earth for triangulating the space on the ground. And basically, we're dealing with possibly two craft, one 14 feet in diameter and one over 20 feet in diameter.
Perhaps the best way to know the diameter of these UFOs that seem to come in different sizes is by looking at the reflection of their spheres. The spheres that these ships have reflect the surroundings. If we know what is behind the photographer, in this case behind Billy, and we know the size of the object behind him, these reflections can tell us if the object is near or far. For this, we use the geometry laws of reflections of light rays on spherical surfaces. When Billy took the first pictures of the wedding cake UFO, he was located on his yard, in front of his home. In this panoramic picture from a postal, you may see at the right the main house, and at the left the carriage house. When this picture was taken, in 1981, there were no tall trees around. By observing this picture, and knowing the focal length of Billy's camera, the researchers found that he was located in the point indicated in this plan view, close to the carriage house wall. Billy's house is located on the right. This is a recent view of the carriage house taken from the parking yard. And this is a composition of how it would have looked back in 1980. So geometry allows us to know if Billy took a picture of a scale model close to his camera, or of a bigger ship hovering on his yard at a longer distance. These are the spheres of this UFO, shown in the picture, and one can see the reflection of the carriage house on the spheres in wide-angle spherical view, and somewhat blurred. Doing mathematical calculations, and based on the size of the carriage house wall, and making geometrical projections, the researchers found out that this wedding cake UFO is more than 2 meters in diameter. The details of this investigation can be found on the website of Professor Jim Dedorf.
And then Meier, of course, took this kind of photo of what's called the energy or light ship. And naturally, the skeptics say it's a double exposure, it's a fluorescent light. However, It turns out when Zahi and I think Chris Locke do their analysis, they find that this is a rather interesting thing. There's no manipulation outside. One of the photos is an in-camera triple exposure, but the rest are simply photographs of this strange object that takes various sizes and shapes, radiates light. Some of the light only goes so far. Very unusual thing. Billy Meier, the one-armed guy hanging out there in the hills, didn't apparently make that. Well, that's interesting evidence. And do we have any other evidence? Yes, of course. We have the sound recordings, we have metal samples.
The fragments are given to chemist Marcel Vogel, an expert in crystalline structures and inventor of many substances used in computer components.
The first specimen I looked at is a metal specimen, which I classified as F1. What is unusual of this small specimen is both highly crystalline nature, and suddenly we come to a metal section as we see here, and it showed a combination of metals that I've not encountered in any normal bit of metallurgy, both crystalline deposits and metal. Now, we, with any technology that I know of, could not achieve this on this Earth plane. I could not explain the type of material that I have and its discreteness by any known combination of materials. I could not put it together myself as a scientist. If I were to take these combinations and put it into a furnace, melt it, then pour it out and pull a little ingot, I would see all of these elements present there in any one area. But I don't. I see this discrete bits of material. Now, it can only happen by some form of a cold fusion process where you have the elements present and you fuse them together so they still maintain their identity, but they interpenetrate into one another. It's also a challenge because I showed it to one of my friends who was a metallurgist, and he shook his head. He said, I don't see how it can be put together. And that's the way we are right now. And I think it's important that those of us who are in the scientific world sit down and do some serious study on these things instead of putting it off as figments of people's imagination. And we find that in this area there is evidence of machining, that there are striations which look like the sample has been worked mechanically. It doesn't look like anything that we've made here. At this moment I would feel very much inclined to accept what was given to me as being true.
Listen here.
Wow, you recorded that here?
My wife recorded this one here, and in the meantime I've been there down very standingly with the other recorder.
You had another recorder down
Yes.
there. How high was the ship above you?
About 60 meters.
60 meters. How far would you estimate it is from here down there today?
I think some 300 meters.
The sounds bear no resemblance to anything Stevens has heard before. Meier gives him both tapes for analysis. The tapes are taken to electronics consultant Niels Rognerud and sound engineer Steve Ambrose for examination.
We have two pieces of equipment. One measures the signal we're listening to in the time domain, the top one here. And the bottom one is measuring the frequency components of the signal.
Yeah, what does this mean when they're all together like that?
What you have is you have many tones happening at the same time, and right now they're aligned. Now they're disaligning. They're out of alignment. They're very much out of alignment. Now they're starting to centralize on one. It's not as though maybe before you had 10 different frequencies at random and then all of a sudden 9 dropped out and you only had 1 left. What's happening is the 10 different frequencies are converging on one central frequency, which is, I find, very interesting. This is probably one of the most interesting things about the tape is that there are...
What's this right now?
Very, very many tones.
Yeah.
And they're all changing very fast.
For a moment there, we were looking in and we had 3 evenly spaced frequencies. See it there again?
Yeah, you got them again.
Yeah.
Niels, would it be possible to recreate this sound?
To be honest with you, I personally don't think so.
There are not synthesizers on the market that have oscillators that change that randomly. Even if you got 9 or 10 of them going, they wouldn't change from those peaks that quickly.
So a significant thing is this rate of change.
Well, and besides, if you were going to create a noise for a spaceship, you'd be hard put to come up with something as original as this. There's another alignment there.
Okay, Lee, what we can do here is...
Intrigued by the findings, Lee Elders takes the tape to Robin Shellman, who has studied the sounds of the earlier craft.
We're showing this throbbing, modulating beat that we hear on the tape. This beat, or modulation, occurs at these frequency peaks. Each one of these peaks is a discrete frequency. If you wanted to give a visual display, let's say we're talking a motor. Could be a motor, a shaft of a motor with 4 magnetic poles or coils around this shaft. The curious thing about this, it changes from 4 to 5, 6, 7, all the way up to a number that is difficult to discern. At a certain point, you're going to generate a certain amount of magnetism. And then later on, you want a stronger field, well, you're going to select 8 fields. All right, now you're going to hear 8 pulses on the tape. And then later on, you want a stronger field, you can select 16, 32.
Is there anything unusual about this?
I would think it's highly unusual. I don't really see any application for it, with the exception of, like I say, either generating a magnetic wave of some sort for laboratory purposes or maybe in this case, propulsion.
Without ever having seen a picture of the new beam ship, Shellman has drawn a representation of the spheres and offered an explanation of their function. The tapes hold still another surprise.
And also, another interesting point to note here is we have a steady, there seems to be a steady pattern all throughout all of this random signal. It seems to be level change very steadily in around 5 to 10 cycles per second, which happens to be in the area of the natural magnetic resonance of Earth, also called the Schumann resonance.
Is that significant in any way?
It could be. It's just interesting to note the correlation there.
The peculiar correlation is something strange.
I mean, why would the correlation be there?
Yeah.
You can see it on the oscilloscope.
Meier says the beam ships can ride the magnetic field of the Earth. Rognerud's findings seem to bear this out.